So, hey guys. Okay, there's been a lot that's gone on in the UK, and trying to figure out where do I even start. Okay, so we'll start with and yeah, I've got it in front of me anyway, so I'll start there. So Andy Burnham won the Makerfield by-election. And before I go on to his win and what that means, I will say Restore Britain. They've been around for only 4 months, if that. They were predicted to get 2% of the vote. They actually came away with closer to 8%. In fact, they got more votes than the Green Party, the Lib Dems, and the Conservative Party combined, which is an impressive feat for a party that's only been around for such a short period of time. So this is that's really great news for them. Reform came second, with Restore Britain third. Now there was a 9,000 vote plus majority that Andy Burnham won over Reform. So for all the calls for Restore Britain to step down or we'll be splitting the vote, that didn't pan out at all. And laughably, people are still calling for Restore Britain to step down. So it really shows it was nothing to do with about splitting the vote. It was, people just feel that Restore Britain are potentially a threat to reform, which they are. Come 2029, I'm pretty sure when the party is ready for a general election, it could well win. So, why on earth would people vote for Labour after the complete catastrophe of the last couple of years under Keir Starmer? Well, I think personally that it is a very personal thing. I think Keir Starmer himself is problematic. I think people don't like the Labour Party, but it would not have mattered who won that night. That by-election would not have changed the government. It would have just changed one person, one seat. So I think, the Keir Starmer was not going. He'd made that very clear. And the only way he was ever going to potentially leave was Andy Burnham winning, because then there would have been an absolute leadership contest. That's why, Labour already held Makerfield, and the MP quit his seat for Andy Burnham to, attempt to win it, which he did. And the only reason they did that was that Burnham had a high chances of success had there been a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer clearly knew that, because 5 minutes after Andy Burnham won that seat, he resigned. So why would they be so personal to Keir Starmer? I think it's been a series of problems. So he does come across as like a Muslim apologist. When there is an attack on the Muslim community, he seems to throw everything at it. Money, new protective laws, everything. He's the first out the stable with his, words of "we will not tolerate this. The perpetrators shall feel the full force of the justice," as he did, following the attack in Edinburgh, where a Scottish man attempted to stab 5 Muslims. Right? Well, I will say this: 5 perfectly innocent Muslims who had done nothing. No one condones that at all. But his reason for doing it was, "I've had enough," which I can understand, right? I'm not condoning that course of action that he took, absolutely not. But we are in a situation where we have got daily, multiple times a day sometimes, reports of, young girls being raped by, sort of Islamists. There are Islamist attacks on British people, stabbings. We've obviously had the attempted beheading as well, hotly on the tracks of the Henry Novak stabbing, and which wasn't a Muslim stabbing. We have to make that very clear. That was a very rare Sikh moment. We don't have issues with the Sikhs, and the problem is the reason people get pissed off with the Muslim community is they never call anything out. They blame the victims. They deny things. Sadiq Khan has been sat, and questioned on grooming gangs in London, and his response is, well, what do you mean by a grooming gang? He knows fine well what a grooming gang is, but he is just absolutely refusing to engage with the questioning and the process, right? And people are getting thoroughly pissed off with that. The Sikh community, in contrast, when Vikram Digra murdered Henry Novak, they come out and condemned it. They made a statement saying he does not represent us, and they did everything that you would expect, the bare minimum that you would expect after, someone from their community did something so heinous. We've had attacks on the Jewish community with ambulances, their own ambulances being set fire to, which they use for the good of the whole wider community in Golders Green. We've had them banned from coming over to watch an Aston Villa match against one of their home teams, allegedly because we could not protect them, which was just not true. That's not true. Yet, when a Muslim set fire to a car outside of a mosque and was caught on camera on Ring doorbell doing it, when a Muslim attacks their own mosque, Keir Starmer then came out and announced an extra £10 million to protect themselves. The Jewish community's got absolutely nothing in protection for any of the attacks. When people were stabbed in a synagogue on Yom Kippur, there was no money offered. When the young white girls have been gang raped, there's been no money offered. In fact, it's been the scandal of the century. It's been covered up, and we have all kinds of ridiculous comments, including this one from the former Scottish National Party leader, Humza Yousaf, who is literally blaming, so this video is of the police arresting the man in Edinburgh who stabbed 5 Muslims. And Humza Yousaf is literally saying, hey, Rupert Lowe, this is all your fault. Because, he's saying, well, if you hadn't done the rape ganging report, that this wouldn't have happened. Which is utter nonsense. Again, I don't condone these attacks, but people are just annoyed and angry and upset with what a lot, not all, but a lot of the Muslim communities are doing to, as being part of these rape gangs. They are fed up with the Muslim community not calling out anyone in their community for these horrific attacks. They are fed up with the government not listening, not doing anything, not even acknowledging. We have now moved on, actually, where before it was the rape gangs would be completely denied. Now, after this report has been published, it's, yeah, but there's not 250,000. It's not that many people. Okay, so you're now conceding that it did happen. After years of denying it happened, you're now conceding it happened, but you're saying that the numbers are inflated. Actually, it's more likely that the numbers are, underestimated. And people are just getting so sick of this attitude. Again, this is not the first time that any reference to grooming gangs has been referred to as a dog whistle. Women are literally suffering. If you haven't read that report, if you haven't watched Asmongold's 8-hour stream reading the report, please read the report. It is harrowing. People had died. People had boiling water poured over them. They were treated like they were gifts. It was absolutely horrific to read, right? And then you have to look at the stark contrast, right, in how Keir Starmer approaches things. Like, we have a side-by-side video, which I'm just going to play one to the other. On the first video is going to be his response to the protests following the death of George Floyd, right? And if we all remember how horrific that was, how many people were injured in that, America was literally set on fire over that, right? Not unjustifiably. I'm all for a protest, like a strong protest too. I am all for that. I think it's, people's civil rights. And especially like in our situation where our government is not listening. And I don't think Andy Burnham is going to be any better. He is just as liberal, if not more so, than Keir Starmer. On the second part of the video then from Keir Starmer is the response to the protests in Southampton against Henry Novak's murder. It was specifically against the police, actually. Now, the vast majority of it was peaceful. Now, it did, towards the end, get a little bit more of a scuffle where wheelie bins were thrown, right? Wheelie bins, for fuck's sake. And he calls us, abhorrent and all the buzzwords. So let's just look at that. I'm not going to talk in between. You just hear the difference in tone.
Like you, I was shocked and angered at the killing of George Floyd and the response of President Trump and the US authorities to the peaceful protests, to people rightly demanding justice, has been an affront to humanity.
I said I weren't going to talk, right? But just, he's calling that. Now, he was a leader of the opposition at this point. He was not prime minister in 2020. Donald Trump was in office. He called for the protesters to be arrested, right? And he's calling out Trump's response to them, to their right to peaceful protest, etc. A protest that was by no means peaceful compared to some of the protests we have over here. He is, when we protest, when we even so much as tweet, we run the risk of being arrested. That is a very real thing. But, back in 2020, it had a totally different kind of opinion and approach to all of this.
There is no justification for more violence and disorder. The attacks directed towards police officers in Southampton last night were disgraceful and completely unacceptable. This is a time for serious work, not rage. And let me be clear, we will ensure anyone found engaging in disorder meets the full force of the law, as we have done before.
So there you go. And that's why he quite literally earned himself the name Two-Tier Keir. There's another reason I think it's that the vote for Burnham was a personal slight on Keir Starmer. And that was in the rape report itself. Here. So Keir Starmer regularly reminds people that he was the director of public prosecutions, right? And he did a lot of good work, so I'm not going to knock him entirely. But it has come to light. We have found evidence that 13,000 suspected rape gang members and paedophiles were let off with a fucking warning letter. How those people did not even get to court, let alone serve a day in prison, is beyond me. Why these people are not going to prison for these offences, I do not understand. If you try to rape anyone, or if you're a paedophile, whether it be that you physically touch a child or you have indecent images, I don't care. They are as bad as each other, and you should be in prison. And it's absolutely wild that we are seeing cases where, people are not going to prison. And again, that comes back to the two-tier justice system that the British people feel we now have. We had those boys who, 3 boys who gang raped a young girl. It was filmed. They were laughing. And they were not sent to prison because the judge did not want to criminalise them. I'm really sorry, but if you rape a girl, then you've already criminalised yourself. What about her? But then, like I say, someone who went to the Southampton protests to protest the police action in the Henry Novak case through a wheelie bin. And he's facing 2 years in prison. Why? What's the difference? The natural assumption is that, well, the person facing prison is white, is non-Muslim. And it's really hard to not think like that anymore, because there is such an imbalance in how, one demographic is treated to the other. And the thing is, right, is we can't even complain about this now. It's like the whole trans movement we had a couple of years ago before the Supreme Court stepped in and brought back some common sense. If, women were being told you have to accept what is effectively a biological male into your space while you're getting changed. Oh, and by the way, if you complain about it, you will be, arrested for a hate crime. You will lose your job. Like, they didn't ask consent, but when we did raise an objection, nope. No. We got to prioritize, this demographic over you. And it's just such a ridiculous situation to be in. And, it's absolutely, there are in every race and religion, same with transgender, there are some real salt of the earth people who I absolutely love. I have great Muslim friends. I have wonderful black friends. I have, I know a couple of really, really lovely transgender people too. And overall, there's no problem whatsoever. But the thinking is amongst women is, look, okay, let's just not deny biological reality. And then when they started to then attempt to change and deny biological reality, women were like, hold the brakes. No, that's not what we signed up for. And then when it was effectively allowed to just self-ID, even though we had laws in place that you had to go through processes to get a gender recognition certificate before you were permitted certain, access to certain things. So when you say to a group of men, you can just say you're a woman, clearly there are going to be some that exploit that. And there were, and they did. And I mean, I personally experienced that whilst taking my then 4-year-old daughter to a toilet in a Tesco store. I personally experienced that. And as someone, and I've been very open on my channel about my experiences of domestic violence and sexual violence, someone who has that kind of experience, someone who has complex PTSD and spent years in therapy, it is very unsettling. And then you're in a situation where you feel like you can't just backtrack and walk out. You can't say anything, you can't challenge it. And it's like, what do I do in this situation? And it's a very, very difficult situation. So to kind of come back though to the situation in the UK now is, what was the transgender movement has now we have the kind of Islam movement, if you like, where, I mean, Islam is the only religion that has its own kind of protection laws, enhanced protection. So let me just see. So yeah, I think that has been a combination of all of this that has just really, the public have had enough. And like I say, I don't think Burnham is going to do much to make that a better situation. Now, one thing I will say is Tommy Robinson. I'm not like a fan, but I appreciate and respect what the guy has done to try and raise awareness of all of this. And he was one of the first people who tried to bring attention to this. And what happened? Well, then he became demonized like everyone else. As soon as I mention this, I'm expecting some hate. It's gone beyond that now. It's like, okay, you know what? To quote Rupert Lowe, I don't care anymore now. This country is not safe you don't feel safe living here. So Tommy Robinson, I have so many people saying, well, why do you care why would you entertain him? You know, and it's not that I'm entertaining him, it's that I'm prepared to listen to what he has to say. Okay. And I think everyone should. I would listen to what anyone has to say. You know, I'd listen to what Zach Polanski has to say. I won't like it, almost certainly won't like it, but I will hear him out and then I will challenge him on it. And that's how a debate should work. And you've got to be prepared to listen to all sides of the opinions, you know, and then try to have a healthy, respectful debate. And I've listened to Tommy Robinson. You know, he went he was very supportive of Rhiannon White's family, and he called out the media and the government for not. The government haven't even spoken to the family. The media did not cover the murder case authentically. We'll just leave it at that. But I appreciate what he does, and I'm forever hearing so many people on all mainstream media saying, "Oh my God, how can we trust Tommy Robinson? You know, he's a criminal, right?" Okay, he was 15 years ago. He was convicted for assault and spent 12 months in prison. That was for a street brawl that involved over 100 people. In 2014, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison because of mortgage fraud, right? 2013, he illegally entered the United States using a friend's passport, so he's convicted for passport fraud. Since then, there's been a contempt of court, right, for publishing a Facebook Live video of defendants entering a court, defendants in a case against him. And then he was convicted in 2020 for common assault, right, for a really minor transgression. He received 300 hours of community service, right? If we're that upset by the kind of people, oh, well, we can't speak to Tommy Robinson, we can't platform him because he's a convicted criminal. Okay, let's look at this then. These are direct perpetrators in the Labour Party who are part of the grooming gang, right? We have Lord Nazir Ahmed, right? He was a former Labour councillor in Rotherham. He was part of the Rotherham grooming gang. He's also a Labour peer, right? So he is a member of the House of Lords. I don't think he sits in the House anymore, but he still has his lifelong peerage. He was convicted in 2022 of multiple child sex offences, including the rape of a 13-year-old girl. He was jailed for 5.5 years, which got reduced to just over 2 years. He had been a Labour councillor since 1990 and was elevated to the peerage by Tony Blair, and the survivors described him as part of the same networks that enabled Rotherham's grooming gangs. A survivor publicly demanded that he be stripped of his peerage and truly shamed. He has not been stripped of his peerage. Former Labour councillor Liron Velleman pleaded guilty to sex offences against a child after approaching a 13-year-old and asking if she was a virgin. Labour councillor Carol Clark faced formal complaints after allegedly warning her paedophile son of his impending arrest in a grooming gang-related investigation while simultaneously voting on grooming gang matters, i.e. she voted against a grooming gang inquiry. The former Labour MP, Ivor Kaplan, was arrested for grooming a 15-year-old child in 2025. And they were not the only ones, by the way, as the report makes very clear. There were people operating in councils such as Rotherham, Rochdale, Oldham, etc., where grooming gangs thrived under political power, which is absolutely disturbing. And then we've got the enablers. Sean Wright, Labour councillor, Rotherham's Children's Services lead, social services lead. He remained in post despite knowing about the scale of the abuse, resigned only after the J report exposed his department's catastrophic failure. So the J report was it looked into Rotherham only. Roger Stone, Labour council leader in Rotherham presided over local government during the government cover-up documented in the J report. There were multiple Rotherham Labour councillors who interfered in police investigations, tipped off perpetrators, and dismissed victims as making lifestyle choices to protect community relations and votes. It's absolutely wild. And it's not just Labour. There are bad apples in the Conservative Party too, in the Scottish politics. It's just absolutely shameful. And, if we sound a bit angry, again, I don't care. I want to say this as well, and I'll put a link to this website, but the Rape Gang Inquiry has a full website, right, which is absolutely amazing. A map of where all of this took place. You can open all this up, and I'm not going to go through it all, but I'll leave a link to the website. You open these links up and they show you where the problems were, what the inquiry is asking for. Then you can access the report here about, though, because I've got a lot of people saying, oh, Rupert Lowe is exploiting the victims. No, he's not. He was working with the victims. So if you're exploiting victims, you just go ahead and do it anyway. Much like, Blake Lively hijacking Section 47.9. I'm getting annoyed now. Blake Lively hijacking California Civil Code Section 47.1, despite the architect and, the person who experienced the sexual harassment, Victoria Burke, saying, please don't, this is my law. It's important to me. It's personal to me because of my experience. And Blake Lively's attorneys emailing back and going, yeah, we're going to do this anyway. Because she did it for selfish gains. Because she's exploiting this law so she can rehabilitate her publicity, which it won't. Rupert Lowe has included the survivors and their families, worked with them with their consent. He's given them, a platform to be heard, to have their stories listened to finally, after being told time and time and time again over the years, no, we don't believe you, it did not happen. Much like a Henry Novak situation. No, I don't believe you, don't think you have, mate. Rupert Lowe gave these survivors somewhere where they could share their stories, they could testify, and even lead the inquiry. As we know, Sammy Woodhouse led this inquiry. She is one of the survivors. Not only that, it was funded by the people, the public. The public donated. They wanted this. The government were trying not to do it, and they've been dragging even though they finally had to U-turn and they've agreed, they are dragging their feet because they don't want to do this. Because why would you, when so many of your own members are involved in it? And then, they've taken the information, they have sought advice from experts, they've worked with the court records, serious case reviews, and not only that, they've also worked with the previous official inquiry. So you've got the J report, which focused on Rotherham, and then the Crowther report, which focused on Telford, and then there was Baroness Casey's 2025 national audit, which is not a full inquiry, but and this is not seeking to replicate this. Now, getting the report together is just one part of a multi-phase process. Rupert Lowe has already said, we will be naming and shaming the various police officers, NHS staffs, the MPs. We will name and shame those who were part of this, who covered this up, who, facilitated it. And then we are going to seek private prosecutions, which is, absolutely an incredible achievement. And it's already had an impact, despite the fact that the news are still not really talking about this. I think it's been Patrick Christie from GB News, who, you know, full respect to him. But we are still not hearing Rupert Lowe's rape gang report. But there has been some progress. Okay, so this is a post from Orla, who oversees Women for Restore. So that's the kind of female division of Restore Britain. Let's have a look. So, if I pull this up.
An inquiry into grooming gangs. Let's bring in our home editor, Jason Farrell. Jason, what can you tell us?
Yeah, quite a few lines coming out now from the National Grooming Gangs inquiry. They're going to be talking to us later. The inquiry and national accountability hearings are going to be taking place by the end of the year. These are hearings where they will listen to looking after these children who were groomed. It might be social services, it might be the councils, it might be CPS or the police, and what they did and where the failings were in those areas. But they've also announced some of the key local areas they're going to look at. We already knew about Oldham, but they're also including Bradford and London. Now, some people might be quite surprised at London. You tend to think of this as an issue that's very predominantly in northern towns, but there has been quite a lot of reports, including on Sky News. We've spoken to victims in London and other outlets as well, and there's been MPs pushing for London to be included in the inquiry from all the political spheres, actually. So it's not that surprising that London is involved, but that has a much more different ethnic diversity to it and a much more complex picture about what's going on in London. But I think it's important that it is included. Bradford, I think, is also important. Bradford is actually pushed back against having a local inquiry in their area because they said they had various reviews and serious case reviews. There was a very prominent campaigner there who's still very prominent, Fiona Goddard, and her story alone about how badly failed she was. We've spoken to her a number of times by all sorts of people. She was living in care and was abused multiple times and trafficked to many towns around the UK. And she always felt that Bradford was one of those areas that really had to be looked at by this review. And the review is going to look at what was going on in Bradford.
So that was great reporting, and it was nice that they mentioned Fiona Goddard, who's been incredible. Her story is also in the the rape gang report, but the bit, and it just annoys me. So I'm going to say the quiet part out that they didn't say. This is all due to Rupert Lowe's hard work and his insistence that, you know, they work with the survivors, they listen to the survivors, and they do something. Got to remember, you know, he's not running with the grooming gangs because he wants to set up a new party. He got kicked out of Reform because he said so, with his, you know, his usual kind of no nonsense tone. We're going to do something about this. We will, you know, deport them all. And he was really kind of staunchly strict on that. And Nigel Farage admitted, which I played in my previous video, admitted that that was part of the reason why they kicked Rupert Lowe out. So, and there's just kind of one, I guess, final piece of the puzzle, if I can just find the video. As this person points out, now there's a short clip of Andy Burnham sort of saying about how awful the read was of the report, etc. Andy Burnham was well aware of what was going on. He was well aware. And as the person posting here says, rightly so, he turned a blind eye. But let's play it anyway to see how his tone has changed. Again, only because of Rupert Lowe's hard work.
Hard to read. It gives a detailed and distressing account of how so many young women were seriously harmed and appallingly failed.
I mean, what can you say? What can you say about it? It's just so infuriating that people are denying it. People are, calling it a dog whistle because one person, went on a rampage to stab Muslims. So now, well, it's all Rupert Lowe's fault, because he, he, he had the audacity to listen to victims who said, hey, this happened to me. And it's just really, it's such a shit situation that we're in now in the UK. And I'm going to round off because in my video on the by-election, I kind of ended and said, oh, Oxfordshire County Council, they've gone to the High Court to seek an injunction to prevent individuals from placing unauthorised flags on or near the highway. So I have an update. They won. They won an injunction to prevent Raise the Colours from placing unauthorised flags. Say unauthorised flags. The only unauthorised flag we have at the moment is this, the St. George's Cross, the flag of England. For some reason, we're not allowed to wear it, fly it, because we are at risk of offending people. Now, I'm sorry, if you're offended by a flag, you need some help, and if that's kind of the way we're going to go, okay, then I'm going to start being offended by, many of your virtue signalling flags or flags from countries that are not part of the UK. This does not apply to the Scottish flag. It does not apply to the Welsh flag. It is only the English flag. And to be honest, we're kind of getting really sick of it now. And I can't even say, I don't even think it is just the English flag, because they also said, they also make the same issue if you try and fly a Union Jack flag. A Union Jack, has a combination of, the colours. Basically, you've got the Scottish cross on there, you've got the English cross on there. No, there's no Welsh dragon, but you have got the white elements. It's really annoying. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments.